All right, well, we wait on the law department to show up. We can start though with updates from Councilmember Morel dealing with, oh, there they are. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, now we can actually start with, and there are the folks from Bayou Title. All right, we can go with the normal course, which JP, you'll go second. So first, let's talk about, and Angela, if you want to just come to the podium, because usually we kind of just do a back and forth. If we can start with talking about the appraiser, and the latest communication we got from him was good news. They sent us the most recent contract from him and his attorney. So that is, going to be sent to the law department. Denisha, I'm assuming you got the copy of this contract. And so now we just need that executed as quickly as possible. Denisha, what do you think is the timeline to get this signed off and ready to go? And you can either hit the mic here, Denisha, or you can go where Angela's at, wherever you'd like.
Let me see. Yes. Okay.
Hey.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I literally just received the contract, so we haven't had an opportunity to take a look at it. I know you received it. The residents of Gordon Plaza received it. So we haven't had an opportunity to properly vet it. But what we did review in my limited review is that it appears as if this particular appraiser is asking for $2,600 per appraiser. So I just don't know if legally we can do that. I'm not sure if that's even industry standards for appraisals. So we're going to take a look at it.
Okay. All right. Like I said, I just got this contract as well, but hopefully we can get this worked out ASAP. And if it's within industry standards moving forward,
okay,
immediately.
All righty. Thank you.
Okay. Angela, any questions on that piece?
I just want to say, first and foremost, recognizing the residents of Gordon Plaza, very grateful to see the presence of so many people who are connected to this work here today. There's been a lot that's transpired from meeting to meeting. So hopefully people who are in the space, if this is your first time to the meeting, that you be cognizant of that. But I just also want to name that the communication regarding that is really important around the contract. Thank you, Ms. Turner, for acknowledging that you've received it. We just want to ensure that, because the last time we spoke about this was December 5th, that we're hoping that whatever people have to work out behind the scenes can happen as quickly as possible. Because part of why we're here today, able to talk about a contract, is because we were hoping that from the 5th up until today, that there had been something that would have been forwarded by the city so that that exchange could already be happening. But in the spirit of moving forward, we just want to name that it's really important that there not be a long drawn out turnaround on that, because after the 5th, because that could have been turned around, there actually could be some appraisals that could be complete already. And we're just mindful that we're getting ready to go into the winter break. And a lot of communication has happened just within the last 24 hours, but today is December 20th, and we were here the last time on December 5th. So this is what we mean when we say, thank you for showing up and being present today, because we need to move this forward. We are coming today with the spirit of moving this forward, but we just really need all hands to be on deck. And we've asked for information to be shared in advance, because then if there are problems or concerns, we're not talking about them for the first time in these meetings. So I'm just going to name a couple of quick things. Should there be any questions or concerns, I'm wondering what we can expect as a turnaround time to name those things, because we don't want to go into the Christmas holiday and have the residents wondering what's on the other side. So I know that they have to look into some things, but we just want to know by when we can expect a response.
That's a fair question. Denisha, what do you think?
Everything depends on how quickly Mr. Baker gets back in contact with us. As soon as we received his name, we reached out to him. There were several messages left, and then Chair Garner was finally able to get in contact with him. So it's really how quickly Chair and Mr. Baker can work out the details of his representation to the city. According to the letter that I just received and you just received, not only does he want half payment up front, he also said it's going to take him 60 days to turn around each appraisal. So that's a longer period of time, not a shorter period of time. So we are hoping by the beginning of the year, considering the holidays, that we should be able to come up with something, but it just depends on how cooperative Mr. Baker is with Chair and the city to negotiate a reasonable price for these appraisals.
So if I can just comment on that, in the spirit of moving this forward and just naming some things, I want to just name that the reason the city is receiving a contract today is because there had been nothing received from the city prior to today. And it was imperative that we not come into this meeting starting from scratch. So to minimize antagonisms today, I want to name a few things. Number one of the reasons we articulated on the 5th, and we were so grateful for the communication that happened that day about there being an opportunity for an emergency contract to be done, is because we did not want to have the back and forth that we've seen over the last year and a half regarding the private law firm. We wanted to save them some time and save us some time. With that being said, there's several different options that can be explored around that, whether it's the emergency contract, if it be the case that a contract is resolved, even within the next 24 hours before people go to the winter break. That particular document that you have indicates the window of time up to 75 days to engage in all of the appraisals up to 67 properties, meaning all of them. So I just want to be clear about that. He's not saying that he needs 75 days. He's saying he needs up to it, and he may not need that. He's also indicating that should the contract be resolved, and we were hoping that when we were in here on December 5th, we could maybe get it done by December 6th or December 7th. But now that we're here on December 20th, he is indicating that if he is able to get that contract resolved, then within the first 15-day window, he can begin the process of those site visits. And so whatever is necessary on the side of the city of New Orleans, the residents of Gordon Plaza are doing everything they can to hold everybody accountable, to include the appraiser, which is why he has produced a document for you to see so that we could talk about something new and different today. So all the cooperation that you need will be there as long as we can get responses. And Mr. Baker has spoken to about 4 or 5 different people from the city of New Orleans thus far. And when it comes to the timeline, in regards to Chair Garner, maybe they're just extremely busy, but neither here nor there. We are saying that whether they're busy or do not want to respond and handle this, they don't have to, because this has come to the city of New Orleans to move this forward. And we do everything we can to try to remove every barrier possible to keep this moving forward.
Yep. I think the question, Denisha, is you said you had some questions regarding the letter that you just received. Yeah. How quickly do you think you can get those questions over to Mr. Pierre, Mr. Baker's attorney, or to Mr. Baker, so we can move this forward as quickly as possible and get those issues resolved?
I'll get those questions to Chair, and they will then communicate with Mr. Baker. We can do that today.
You can do it today.
Mhm.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, and just one more question before Ms. Turner takes her seat, or if she's going to stay here very quickly. I want to note again that when there was a discussion, I'm just putting it all out on the table so that there's nothing that gets confused. when there was a discussion about an emergency contract, it was to prevent this back and forth with Share Garner. And so if we continue to get that back and forth, or you continue to get that back and forth, I just want to remind everybody that the city of New Orleans hired Share Garner, and you all have another option if need be, because maybe the people that Share Garner are just a little too busy for this particular piece. But regardless to the reason for why it's not being attended to, we are saying that the residents are still waiting another day unnecessarily. So we really appreciate Ms. Turner being here, and we really appreciate that follow-up. We're just asking people not to take no for an answer, not take a phone call not being returned for an answer, and not take, I don't know if I have time to speak to you today for an answer. That's all we're asking for.
And if I may, this is not an emergency contract whatsoever. This is an agreement between a subcontractor of Share Garner in order to secure services that the city of New Orleans is asking for.
However you all want to name the contract, we're just asking that it continue to move forward. So we welcome that. Whichever route you want to take, that we can just expedite the process.
All right, so you're gonna get the questions in by this afternoon, and we'll get those answered. Hopefully they can turn around Mr. Pierre and Mr. Baker by tonight to have those questions answered and resolved. All right, so any more on that topic, Angela?
No, it's just that we know that when we were in here on the 5th, everyone that was in the process for the last 3 meetings understood that we were hoping that all of the answers we needed to get would be resolved by December 22nd. That was supposed to be the last governmental affairs meeting. We understand that that meeting's been canceled on the schedule, so we're still committed to trying to move all necessary answers forward prior to then, so that the residents of Gordon Plaza could at least have a peaceful holiday season, understanding that things are moving forward.
All right, got it.
That's it.
Okay, on the next topic, before we get to the folks from Bayou Title, Councilmember Morel, you have an update on the rental assistance piece and the relocation.
Correct. So, and I believe this has been distributed both electronically and there are physical copies here. We have received the draft CEA agreement with TCA regarding relocation expenses. The law department drafted this morning. The CEA has been forwarded to TCA leadership for their review and consideration. Once TCA has had an opportunity to digest the agreement, they're going to respond with any additional changes they may need, and that's to deal with relocation expenses. As far as rental assistance, we were hoping, and we still hope the city can perform this function through our Office of Community Development, but we've also re-engaged TCA about their ability to make the rental payments to the city not have the needed capacity. Basically, our Office of Community Development has an existing rental program, which is in high demand. And we did not necessarily want Gordon Plaza because of the urgency in accessing rental proceeds to be also intermingled with everybody else doing the traditional rental assistance program. So they're getting back to us on their capacity. We may have to go back to TCA to manage the rental program as well. And that's it. Additionally, and it should have also been that those packets that are available, we've been working with the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center to get the summary of basically the market rate for rentals based upon bedrooms. And we have those by zip code. So you can see what those are, what the market rates are, and what that allowance would be for rental assistance for that extended period during relocation.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank your office and thank Keith for sending that information over. Because TCA needs time to process through that, and that those documentations also came over today, that the residents will now have an opportunity to do the same thing while that's going on. And so what we have found is that it makes it easier for all of us when those conversations are happening, that people just have an opportunity to say, if there was anything that came back from TCA that looks different from what was sent over today, that the residents would know that, and that they would be able to offer some feedback as well. Because there are there are about 14 pages of this document, and the residents would like to have the same opportunity to process that, and they can do so quickly.
We can certainly commit to that. So if we get feedback from TCA that alters the document, we will forward to y'all through your representatives what those new documents look like so that you can review them as well. And certainly y'all have the same time period to look through here and provide input for us to respond to. I do want to make sure and reiterate and thank Louisiana Fair Housing Network,
Yes.
Action Network, because they've been very significant and aggressive partners in trying to help us get the numbers necessary so we can allocate the funding for that emergency rental program.
Councilman Morrell, one other thing that we want to make sure gets noted is that we want to ensure that as many barriers are removed as possible across the board, to include for the renters. So when there's an indication that renters will need to talk about, discuss, or produce tenant income, that we know if there's anything else attached to that, because we want to make sure that there are no unnecessary barriers involved in that process. And so when we get to that point, we would like those things to be named as well.
Okay, and just as I reiterate, and Keith just put those are the hard copies of what I just talked about for your review, but they're electronic copies that have already been sent to your representatives as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
If there's no, I know we need to get on to talking about Bayou Title, but just a couple of things. I don't know if you were getting ready to bring these up, Councilman Moreno, but just a couple of loose ends to tie up from the last meeting. Just quickly, we know that, and Councilman Morel, this may come back to you, but when it came down to the actual expenses for moving expenses, meaning the residents calling a moving company and being able to proceed forward, we made note in the last meeting, and everyone was in agreement, but I just want to make sure that you're here to hear this as well, and CAO Montano, that also applies to the renters when it comes to the moving, so that they have the ability to call the movers, have their belongings moved as well. We also understand that it's a one round move, meaning that if they should choose to have their items moved from their current home in Gordon Plaza to their new healthy home of choice, that's a move for an owner. If it's a renter, same thing if it moves to their new healthy home of choice. And then there's also the option for them to be able to move their items into storage if they so desire. We just want to make sure that if there are owners or renters who have to make a choice that they're going to take their belongings with them to their new healthy home of choice, and they realize that they cannot take them all, and they decide that they want to use storage for the excess items that they have until they can figure those out, that all be a part of that move.
I don't think that's problematic. I mean, if in the update that y'all have shown in front of you on relocation expenses, it says this agreement would provide for direct payments to vendors chosen by the residents to relocate or store their belongings removed from their homes in Gordon Plaza. So it contemplates both. So that if someone, and to your point, if someone, let's say, is moving from a house to an apartment temporarily, this would include, I think it's reasonable to assume it would include paying for a vendor to store property during that comparable rental period.
Yes.
So I think that's a good point. We will make sure we note that in our conversations.
Okay, thank you for that. There was one other thing that we had spoken about in the last meeting where we talked about if there was the need to not only talk about, we separated this out into three parts. There is the relocation cost that's connected to the moving company for the truck to come relocate belongings. There's also the relocation cost separate and apart when we're talking about the temporary displacement. I know that Andrew had spoken last time about the city council needing to amend the current environmental equity relocation fund that you had talked about before. So we just wanted to note if there's a timeline on those as well. Like when do those come up for city council meetings for vote to move that forward?
Well, I think right now we're waiting from guidance on OCD, Office of Community Development, on their capacity. Because if we're talking about internal moving money around the city through city departments, amending the fund might not be necessary because we could directly appropriate the funds to them. If we have to go to TCA and pursue an outside process because OCD can't do it, then that would put us in a predicament where we have to amend the fund to address that new concern. So
Okay,
I would expect that, I mean, Keith is nearby. I would expect that we should have that turnaround from OCD pretty quickly as far as their capacity, because really it's a capacity issue.
okay, so then to answer that question, I would just then go back and ask you, what is the turnaround time that you've provided to TCA to look over the documents and make a determination with that added piece?
I am not clear if we gave TACA a hard timeline, because
Okay.
remember that we're talking to their staff, they still have to go to their board.
Mm,
And I don't know what their internal process on how quickly they do that is. We can have a conversation with TCA and see what that turnaround is internally to them.
If you can, and if you could ask them if it's possible also, that transpire before, the city moves into this winter break. It would just be helpful to know where we stand in relationship to that. Because if that doesn't come back, then that lets us know that we're dealing with council meetings down the line. And we just want to keep up with the timeline.
Okay, well, I think the first step, and I'll talk with Keith and my staff, we'll get a timeline from TCA on what their estimated timeline is for their turnaround, because that would trigger when council action would be necessary.
Okay. The other thing that we spoke to, and I want to thank Mr. Joe Threat for having been in that last meeting. I don't know if this has been reported back to CAO Montano. Everyone seemed to understand what we were talking about, but we wanted to give room and space for people to figure some things out or see if they could answer the question. And one of the things we said is there's the moving expenses for the personal belongings with the moving company. There's the relocation assistance for people who need the temporary relocation or temporary storage. And then there's also the relocation assistance associated with things like packing, unpacking, disconnecting, connecting things connected to utility and such. That is also included in relocation assistance costs. We understand that the law does make provision for that, so we would not have even brought that up in this space if we thought that would be a barrier. And so we just want to see if there's any follow-up in regards to that.
I'll look at Joe, but I think everything is still under the same premise that you just described. I don't think there's been any diversion to the agreement that you described.
Okay, and I just want to note it because as you are continuing to explore and things get fine-tuned, there's a difference between this and what transpires with TCA for moving, because there's no TCA ends up paying the mover. But in this particular case, these involve fees that have to come from the residents. And we understand that the law does allow for them to be provided a lump sum in regards to that. And we just want to make sure that there's no barriers to that. And if I have to roll that over to the next Gordon Plaza Task Force meeting, as you process that, I'm just making a note. Let me just say this. We know that people, we know that it can be done. It's just a matter of you all verifying how it will be done. So would you like me to move on?
You're gonna work on that with Mr. Threat?
Yeah, I mean, I think between Denisha, myself and Mr. Thread, if it's the legal question that you were regarding, we can work on that.
Okay, and let me also say this too, and I want to say this with the legal team present here as well. Our whole purpose for bringing these things up in the meeting is to help ensure that we're not waiting until the last minute when these things do come up, that people have the time that they need to explore these things so that it can move forward as seamlessly as possible. So we're not rushing people on the front end or dragging people on the back end. We're just naming these things in advance so that we don't have to speak about them from scratch when the time comes. Okay, we're gonna keep going. And then there was a concern that we brought up, and I'm glad CAO Montano is here as well, because we used Ms. Sheena as an example for the appraisal process. And one of the things that was noted, and I want to thank everyone here, was two things that you all indicated that when it came down to the process regarding the title company, and I know that they will present momentarily, so that'll answer a lot of questions, that we not have any confusion with the residents, that they would get their funds in the form of a cashier's check. And if they had to have a check for their buyout payment separate and apart from a check for a deed or an outstanding payment that they had, that would be possible for them. We just want to note separately from that, if there is a case where there's a resident who has an outstanding tax fee, we want to ensure that they are not prohibited from getting their buyout money in this process, which would happen if we were not surfacing it up right now. The issue that we brought up last time is in a case like Ms. Sheena, her tax payment may be approximately $2,000, but the city of New Orleans adds on additional fees, interest, et cetera, and balloons that $2,000 payment up to like $20,000. And we think that the city, in purchasing these properties back, should be able to negate and or waive those taxes, because you will be inheriting the property. And we just want to name that in advance because we understand that in some cases, there may be someone out there who decided to jump into like an auction and pay the $2,000 taxes. The residents understand that there may be a difference that would be paid through that separate cashier's check, but it makes no difference, and it makes no sense in the world that a resident who's in Gordon Plaza, who has been paying taxes on soil that has been toxic, be in a situation where they have to carry that burden unnecessarily, because they're going to need every penny to be able to advance forward to move into their healthy homes of choice. So I don't know if you have an answer for that now, or if you want to contemplate that, but that's something that
I think the city attorney's gonna have to look into that. As far as waiving late fees and the like, the
Mhm.
city has some flexibility in that. You can't waive property tax because of the Constitution of the state of Louisiana.
I understand that. That's separate and apart.
But as far as fees, like late fees and the like, I do believe the city has some discretion in that. But if you're talking about specifically on property taxes, I don't think anyone can waive property tax.
So let me reinforce in what I'm saying, so there's no confusion. If by chance the tax bill is $2,000 and the difference because of all those fees is $18,000, making the total 20, we understand the 2,000.
Right.
We just want that 18,000 to vanish.
I think we're in agreement on that. As far as fees, there's some flexibility there, but underlying taxes, we do not have the authority.
I understand.
Okay.
So what would happen in that case is that resident would be provided their cashier's check for their payment, and the difference in a separate cashier's check for the $2,000 or whatever the difference would be. Okay, we'll wait for Bayou Title to speak to that. We just need to make sure though, because the Bayou Title is just gonna run the thing. They need to know in advance where the city of New Orleans sits in relationship to that. And those are the kind of things we're trying to work out proactively.
And thank you, Councilmember Morrell. You are absolutely correct that we cannot waive taxes, but we can take a look at the fees. And that's a case by case basis.
Thank you for that, Ms. Turner. We do have some additional questions that have already been submitted to you all in regards to Bayou Title. We would just ask after the presentation that there be a little space for some follow-up questions, just to make sure that Bayou Title has the opportunity to take those follow-up questions with them as well, so that they can prepare accordingly.
That sounds good. And their presentation is supposed to be pretty much based on the questions that
Okay.
you all provided. So hopefully they'll be answered along the way.
Okay, and one other thing, we did indicate as a part of the questions that if there's information that they need to surface that we did not ask about, we welcome that at this time.
All right, so the folks from Bayou Title can come up. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Montano to introduce them.
Thank you, council member. We did receive your questions, I think December 17th. They've been forwarded, and I know that the panel here has been meeting with the law department and anxiously awaiting the presentation. I'll defer once they're settled for their individual introduction so that we have a name and a face. I know some are familiar to the group, and I will turn it over to
I just want to offer a quick thank you before they start, because this is an example of what we meant a year and a half ago when we said we could just jump to the transactional things. And so when this was brought up on the 5th, and then President Moreno said, I'll reach out, and then Gilbert Montano said, yes, let's make it happen. This is all transpired within a 1-month time frame. So I just want to name that and say thank you, because I'm hoping going forward, this is the stuff we can focus on to keep advancing this forward.
and without further delay, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank y'all for having us. My name is Brent Laliberty. This is my wife, Kathy Laliberty. We're the owners of Bayou Title. Quick little history. We opened Bayou Title in 1999 in New Orleans East. We have grown to become the largest title company in the state of Louisiana. We were a road home vendor for 10 years. We've done a lot of bulk transactions, so getting involved in this project, we feel very comfortable with because we have a history of doing this. We've closed about 100,000 transactions in our career, and we look forward to answering whatever questions y'all may have. What we did circulate, which we have up here, is the a PowerPoint that I had put together because I think there were some concerns as to what Bayou Title's involvement is, and I can tell you that we were solicited by Cher Garner and Carl Butler as to whether we were interested. We offered some pricing up to them, which is similar to what we charge in any transaction. And we were chosen to work on this transaction. If you're familiar with what a title company does, we're kind of on the tail end of the transaction. Basically, when everything else has been done, we do the paperwork, which allows the ownership to be changed. And that's no different here. We understand the process as it relates to the Gordon Plaza residents, trying to determine whether or not they're interested in selling. And obviously that's a process that they need to go through, and which starts off with an appraisal and goes from there. Our involvement doesn't commence until after an appraisal has been performed. Once the city has made an offer to the resident and the resident has accepted. So that's when we technically become engaged. I can tell you that at present, that involves 2 properties. Because we wanted to make sure that we could promote this process in an expeditious fashion, we had received copies of 6 other letters where offers were made to the property owners. And we went ahead and took it upon ourselves just to go ahead and get that work done as well. So we would know that if the property owners were interested in moving forward, we'd have some of the legwork done as well. Since then, we've even gone further, and we've actually performed abstracts and title exams and issued title commitments on all of the properties with the exception of 8 of them. This was at our cost. We did not, this is nothing that's billable at this point. If you understand the closing process, typically we don't get paid until a transaction closes. The only thing different here is the fact that even if a transaction doesn't close, and it's one that we've been engaged on, we would get, I think, $450. Okay, so that's our cancellation cost. So to date, the only exposure the city has is on 2 files. The other 58 properties that we've examined thus far, we did that just in the interest of pushing the process forward. So I can tell you to all the owners here and others alike, we know based on public records who owns the property, what mortgages there are, what taxes are paid or unpaid, whether there are liens, whatever it may be. I can tell you that I've been sharing with my counterparts these spreadsheets, and I'll just hold them up so people can see. Every one of these lines represents a property, and everything that's in green in our estimation is what we consider to be clear to close. So for the most part, if I was only working as a title agency and there weren't any other conditions to be satisfied, we could probably close 50 of these files next week. Now we know that's not going to happen because there's a process that needs to go on. But I just wanted to reassure the residents that we're not just sitting here waiting. We've actually invested our time, our expense, to gather information as to who owns the properties and what's owed. And so if and when they decide that they want to move forward, that process is going to be very brief, as at least as far as we're concerned. You know, I can't control whether or not we have difficulty getting payoffs. Sometimes that takes a little bit longer. As I mentioned, our research identifies who the owners are. We don't know whether or not some of the owners have since passed away. So if that's the case, there may be some other legal work, successions or such that may need to get done. But for the most part, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that, you know, we've only been engaged for 2 files, but we've actually have this book represents title commitments on every resident in that subdivision, with the exception of 8 of them, which 7 of those 8 were returned to me today. So I will have those added to this by tomorrow. And then there's just 1 other property. So if and when the property owners decide to move forward, Bayou Title is well positioned to make that occur as expeditiously as possible. Okay. I was also asked to maybe explain the process as it relates to a real estate transaction. That's why we had put together this PowerPoint. As I just mentioned, the critical initial stage is for the residents to make a decision to have their property appraised. If their property is appraised and they wish to move forward with that, then they're going to communicate that to Cher Garner and Carl Butler. And what they're going to do is send out a letter to them, and they need to accept it. Once they accept that offer, then we're going to reduce that to a purchase agreement. And what we have created as of right now is a 90-day window. The city attorney and I and Carl and my wife were talking earlier, that 90 days is flexible in either direction. If the individuals need more time, the city, as my understanding, doesn't mind accommodating that. If the individuals would like to close sooner than that, the city doesn't mind accommodating that either. But just, you know, we have to start off with some number, some date. So that's where 90 days was selected. But there's a whole lot of flexibility on that. As I'd mentioned, once we're been communicated with and retained to move forward, as we would in any real estate transaction, we have to communicate with the property owners. And in order for us to do a valid, to complete a search, I mean, I don't want to say invalid. Right now, we have a search that's done based on what's a public record. What we don't know is whether or not a property owner has since passed. We don't know whether or not a property owner has remarried. We don't know things like that. So what we would do is get current information and compare that to the information we have, and then update records accordingly. And then, so that's why we request the name, variations, marital status, social security number, dates of birth. Those are all things that are designed to allow us to distinguish. If you're not familiar with the process, if someone has a judgment or a lien or something against them, almost always those are distinguished by someone's date of birth or social security number. So that's why that's important. Also, if there's a mortgage on the property, we would need to find out who the current mortgage holder is. As it's very common, a lot of times whenever any of us borrow money from a particular lender, that may not be who we end up paying or continue to pay during the term of the loan. So what we would get is the current mortgage holder and also the loan number so we can secure a payoff from them. As I mentioned, we've done work on all of the properties with the exception of 8, and that 8 has now been reduced to 1. So we have 67 of the 68 have been abstracted, and by tomorrow will be examined. Once again, we're going to then compare, once we meet and discuss with the property owners, compare the information we have to the information that they provided to make sure that there's no discrepancies or things that we didn't pick up on initially. As I'd mentioned, once the owner has decided to sell the property to the city, based upon agreeing to the sales price, then what we're going to do is present a purchase agreement for their execution. That would need to be signed by all parties of record and also signed by a representative of the city as well. I can tell you that the way these purchase agreements are very vanilla, if you will. If someone is interested in seeing the form, we can share it, but I can tell you we're working from the Louisiana Real Estate Commission form that's on their website. Effectively, it's just showing a cash sale. There will be proration of taxes. The city has agreed to not collect the document transaction tax. The city has agreed to pay whatever the typical seller settlement fee would be. So the only deductions that a property owner would expect to see on their settlement statement would be any payoffs they have, any releases to accommodate those payoffs, and also any taxes or unpaid tax sales. So my job as a title attorney is to make sure that once we transfer title to the city has a good, valid 100% ownership interest with no impingements on there. So that's what we're going to do. If I mentioned on the first bullet part, just a repeat, but the second bullet there is the fact that as we suspect, we don't know, but there may be some difference in ownership, that maybe who the owners of record are may not be the ones now, because obviously someone may have passed away along the way. I can tell you my abstractors have also run the CDC records while they were doing the search. So if there was someone that is the owner of record and there was a succession that was filed, then we did in fact cross-reference that. But I do a lot of successions. I can tell you that it's not always a rush to do a succession if there's no reason to. And not to mention someone else may have been residing in a different parish or domiciled in a different parish, so it may also be in different parishes. But if it and when that does occur and there is some help or some legal work that needs to be performed, we are an option, but there are plenty of options. The residents can choose to use whoever they want. Obviously, I would maintain control to review the succession documents, make sure they were handled correctly, but they can engage whoever they want. One of the beauties that we have, and really most title companies have, is the fact that whenever we are engaged to do legal work, that ends up being something that gets paid out of the closing. So at least it makes it easier that no one has to expend any of their funds in advance. But once again, that's totally up to the residents as to who they'd want to engage. There are some payoffs that would be satisfied. I know my research shows there's probably about 12 or 15 properties that have SBA mortgages. I can tell you SBA doesn't waive mortgage balances. They're going to have to be payoffs and all of that. There are some very few, but a couple of items, whether it be a lien or a judgment, that we need to distinguish. And what I mean by that, if you're John Doe, there are also other John Does out there. So our job would be to list the fact that there's something against a John Doe, but then we need to distinguish it from being our John Doe. So that's on our commitments. They have probably more items listed as possibilities because we are not able to distinguish them at this point because we don't have dates of birth or social security numbers of the parties. Once a closing has been agreed to, we're going to be as accommodating as we can to the residents. We have 20 offices around the state. We have an office in Mississippi. We can accommodate split closings. If someone wants to close at one particular office and it's more convenient for someone else to close at another particular office, we can accommodate that. I can tell you the sequencing, obviously, we need to make sure that we have the money in hand. And we talked about this earlier. We have a process already set up to request a draw request from the city. And as long as we have the money in hand, then obviously at any given point, once the last seller has signed, we can disperse. You know, if we have 3 sellers and the first person, if they come in at different times, the first person comes in and the other 2 have not yet come, we cannot disperse until everyone's signed. So that would be the only delay in disbursement, because we need to make sure we have all the signatures. Powers of attorney can be arranged as needed. We just sent one out. We have one of the owners is residing in Florida. So we just sent a power of attorney out to her to accommodate her being able to transact business without having to physically come back to Louisiana. Our plans are to get a HUD-1 settlement statement to both the city and all the property owners at least 3 days prior to closing. We don't believe in any surprises, and give them an opportunity to review it, make sure it's accurate, request, if they have any questions, they want us to provide more information, we're more than willing to do so. Our goal is to, at the same time that we request that we send out the documents for our early review, is to request from the city the processing of the funds. As y'all may be aware, the city's funds are on deposit with Liberty Bank. We also maintain a checking, a bank account, escrow account with Liberty Bank. So that's going to facilitate a very easy transfer. It won't even be a wire. It'll just be a book transfer. So that's something that can happen very easily. We will coordinate a closing time, a closing date, time, and location, wherever is most convenient. What you need to do is bring either your state ID or a driver's license. Obviously, we have a duty whenever we notarize documents is to make certain that who is presenting themselves as being a particular person has evidence to support that. And we would say that allow for a closing to take 45 minutes to an hour. I can tell you this basically as complicated as it is going to be to get to a closing. Ultimately, at the closing, it's a cash sale. So this could very easily be a 15-minute transaction. Okay. It's we provided to Share Garner and Carl Butler Law early on all the documents that we would expect to be signed. It's a pretty generic package. It would be the exact same package each and every time. Settlement statement, cash sale, and other documents. Closing locations that we offer up. As I mentioned, Kathy and I opened up Bayou Title in New Orleans East in 1999. We still maintain a presence there. We own a property out there. We have an office on St. Charles Avenue in the Garden District. We own our building on Maple Street, and we're also situated Lakeview on the corner of Katina and Allen Toussaint. We have offices around the metro area that also could be convenient for some people: Gretna, Metairie, Mandeville, Slidell, and Hammond. And then we also have offices all throughout the state. So whatever's easier for anyone, that's what we're going to do. Question had arisen as it relates to closing proceeds. We're going to disperse at the time of closing, unless otherwise directed. Disbursements are going to equal up to percentage ownerships. A lot of times we may have a married couple and we'll have one check jointly made payable to the two of them for the combined sum. If there's a preference that be two different checks instead, we can do that as well. We do report these transactions to the Internal Revenue Service. So we do need to get a full 9-digit Social Security number. I can tell you that we make every effort. We're required by law to protect everyone's identity and all their NPPI. The only item that numbers that will appear on any of our sales documents will be the last 4 digits of a Social Security number. We do not put the full Social Security number. Some frequently asked questions: who is covering the closing costs? As I mentioned, if this was a typical cash sale where the property owner owed nothing on the property and they closed on the first day of the month, first day of the year, they would get the gross proceeds. The only way the gross proceeds are going to be reduced would be if there is a payoff, if there are other lien, interest, or judgments that may apply, if there are taxes outstanding, tax sales, things like that. But as it relates to Bayou Title costs, there are no costs that the seller is paying as it relates to the transfer. If it turns out that there are mortgages, there are in fact costs associated with that. We need to send payoffs out either overnight or via wire. We need to have the mortgage canceled from the property once the paid release has been obtained. So there are those costs. So the city is committing to the settlement statement, a settlement fee, but not the other fees incidental to other items that a property owner may have against the property. The city has also agreed to waive the documented transaction tax. If you're aware of it, in Orleans Parish, a seller is typically charged $325 whenever a property is sold. The city has agreed to waive that, so that will not be a charge that the property owners would bear. What about real estate taxes? As Ms. Turner had mentioned, I mean, taxes are not forgiven. They can't be forgiven. They will be prorated. It's a simple process. It's whatever the base taxes are, 365 days, that's going to be what we call the per diem tax rate. If it turns out that we get later in the year and there are, in fact, other interest and penalty items, Usually all the interest and penalty gets charged to the seller and just the base tax gets prorated. There was some discussion as to whether or not the city has the ability to waive some of the late fees and interest, things like that. That's really not my call. I will tell you that we don't close anything without a written payoff in hand. So if the city says that's what they're willing to do, and that's in the written payoff that we have no problem doing that. But we're not going to close without something showing what the city says is due and payable. There was some discussion about tax sales. If you're familiar, for the most part, tax sales are redeemable for 3 years. Tax sales could be third-party tax sales, or tax sales could be adjudicated tax sales to the city of New Orleans. So whatever fashion they are, we're gonna deal with all those accordingly. I mean, obviously, if you get to a third-party tax sale that's surpassed a redemption period, well, then that's not statutorily provided for. What I mean by that is a tax sale purchaser sometimes holds out for additional funds. So I think, to my memory, there may be one property on the 60 that we've examined that had a third-party tax sale. There was probably, if I had to guess, maybe 5 or 8 of them that had an adjudicated tax sale to the city, which is actually, those are much easier to negotiate and get payoffs on. So that's not a problem. If there's a third-party tax sale that's surpassed a 3-year redemption period, then that becomes a little bit harder to work with. We talked about the tax sale there. I guess I'm one slide ahead. Basically, this all needs to be satisfied. We have issues. The city has tax sales that they record in conveyance records, and they also have the records of a tax sale on the tax bill. So it's our job to make sure that we check both of those and make sure not only that we're recovering what it was that was due and payable at the time of the tax sale, but also to make sure that we recover what else has been incurred since then, right? Because I mean, it may be that someone had a tax sale for 3 years ago, but if taxes haven't been paid since, there's also additional years of taxes as well. So it's a combination of looking at both the tax sale document itself and the tax bill as well. How does Bayou Title get paid? As I mentioned, we had negotiated some pricing with Sher Garner and Butler Law Firm, which really just mimics what our street pricing is. I mean, title's a very competitive business, so it's not a question of what we want to charge. It's a question of what you end up charging, which is kind of consistent with what the industry standards are. As I mentioned, the seller is not going to pay the settlement fee, but they would pay any other fees that are related to items that are being paid off. And as I stated early on, to date, we've technically only been engaged on 2 files. So if neither one of those closed and I was dismissed tomorrow, the only obligation I think that I would be owed is $900. What I've done, we're a good sized company. We employ a lot of internal abstractors. So we made a bet on the fact that the property owners would appreciate the fact that we know as much as we can know. Should they decide to move forward, and if they decide they want to sell the property and they're anxious to do so, there's no one better suited than us right now because we know as much about what's owed on that property as they do. Can I get my proceeds wired to me? The answer is yes. I noted there was a question earlier. Can you get a cashier's check? The answer is yes. We'll accommodate in any fashion that we need to. That's not a concern. I would tell you though that in today's environment, there's a lot of phishing and spoofing and things like that. So we need to make sure that if someone decides they want to wire, we get wiring instructions early on, and we get a secondary verification on that. And if someone presents themselves as being that property owner and decides to reroute that, our company policy is at that point you get a check, because what we don't want to do is give anyone's money to the wrong person. So what do you need to do next after the closing? Really nothing. It's all on us at this point. Once the closing takes place and all the disbursements are made, Louisiana is what they refer to as a table funding state. So provided we have, but it's also a good funds state. We have good funds law. So provided we have all the money that is required, we're going to give out all the money that same day. So as I mentioned, the only thing that we have to be cautious about would be the sequencing of if we have multiple sellers coming in at different times, that we can't disperse any money until the last person has signed. We will send out the payoffs. We will get all the cancellations returned to us, and then we will present that to the courthouse. We record everything e-recording. So a sale that occurs on a Monday will be of record probably Tuesday, Wednesday at the absolute latest. So there'll be a change of ownership that's recognized to the public immediately. And that's all that I have, but I'm certainly available for whatever questions they may be out in the audience.
Well, first, Mr. Laliberty, did I pronounce it correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Unless you're French, it'd be La Liberté.
Oh, okay. There you go. I just want to thank you for your really thorough presentation and for taking the time to answer many of the questions that were sent your way by the CAO, which were the questions from the Gordon Plaza residents. So with that, Angela, I'll turn it over to you if there's anything that maybe he hadn't had the opportunity to address that you may have questions for him.
No, thank you. Thank you. I do have some follow-up questions, but because your presentation was so comprehensive, that's going to save us time. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the proactive engagement and preparation that you did, because all of that information is the information that we said a year and a half ago, somebody like you would already have and could save us time. So I just want to name that and thank you. Thank you for that. So a couple quick things. First one is the most important one, and and I want to pronounce it correctly as well, La Liberté.
La Liberté.
La Liberté. Okay. I want to just name that he has surfaced today a question that we asked 8 months ago, and it was about ensuring that the money on hand transactional piece is up to par. So can somebody just speak to that? Because the other questions I have are real quick, easy questions, but I know he can't answer that question by himself. So what's the turnaround time if by chance residents show up for their appointment? They could show up to any one of these particular offices. How do we ensure, and we asked this 8 months ago, how do we ensure that there's not a situation where a resident shows up to get their check and then, Bayou Title's like, well, we did our part, but money's not on hand. Like, how do we proactively address that, mitigate that on the front end? Because that's not going to be good for anybody. Who can speak to that?
If I may, I was told on Sunday, actually Brent and I were told on Sunday that by Carl Butler, that Norman White, the city's chief financial officer, would be the one that we would communicate with to request the funds. And I spoke to Norman yesterday briefly, and he said to give him an email with kind of everything that I needed answered. So what I told him was that, we needed to know how much time does the city need for us to request the funds to be able to tell these people, okay, we can close you next Tuesday or whatever date. And those questions were just sent to Mr. White today, and I am waiting on a response from him. So once we know the time frame for getting the money is how we can communicate how quickly we'll be able to schedule the closings for the residents.
Mr. Montano, can you get with Mr. White to get an answer to that as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
If
you want to just maybe forward me the email as well, I'll connect with him.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we've already provided a draw request so they know procedurally how the process is going to go. So I think, like a lot of things, the first one may be more awkward than the second one, but I think the expectation is we're going to present a draw request along with all the documents. And I don't know in your office who's going to review that, but once again, once you've seen one closing, they're all going to look the same because it's going to be the same 8 documents. So I don't want to minimize it, but I think whoever's going to approve it on behalf of the city ought to be able to turn that around very quickly. And as I'd mentioned, the money is already at Liberty Bank. So as long as they instruct Liberty Bank to release the funds, that should be a seamless process.
Got it. Okay.
And we've actually had a meeting yesterday with Norman White and his team regarding exactly the details of the transfer. So that's already in the works.
Okay.
And we already know how many days in advance we actually need to send the payment to Bayou Title.
How
So
many
we have
days?
that information, 3 days.
3 days.
So 3 days prior to the closing, we need to transfer the money to Bayou. And like Brent said earlier, it should be a seamless process because they have an escrow account at Liberty Bank as well. So yesterday when we were meeting, that was one of the questions. And I actually joked whether they had an escrow account at Liberty Bank, and they do. So that's going to make the process a lot easier and
Sure.
faster.
Okay, so actually, we've already answered the question. So the
Okay, thank you for that.
question is 3, so.
The follow-up to that,
Yeah,
I would still get it in writing. And we want it also, if we can, Mr. Montano, because we want to make sure that we can go back. There's some community members who cannot be here today to say, we know for certain it's a 3-day turnaround. We want the residents to get their minds prepared for what that turnaround time is, so that that frustration doesn't show up on Bayou Title unnecessarily, okay? The other thing is, I just heard you say, because we asked this a year ago, and then again 6 months ago. So what we're hearing is these funds that are sitting in Liberty Bank are now in an escrow account, or are they still in the regular account? I just want to be clear about that.
The funds are in the same account, so they're not in an escrow account.
Okay,
And also, it's not a 3-day turnaround. We're
Mhm.
not quite sure what the turnaround is. What we've stated is that we need to send the money to Bayou Title 3 days prior to the closing. So I believe the question that Kathy was trying to get an answer to is how many days in advance of those 3 days does she need to request the money so that it could be there 3 days prior to the closing?
I got it. So Ms.
Correct.
Liberty, what you're trying to figure out is, can you do it like the day before and then they can send it and then you have 3 days, or do you need to do it 10 days before?
Correct.
And then in 10 days, you'll send the money and then there's the 3 days.
And then there's the closing 3 days
The
after
closing
that.
3 days after that. Yes.
Exactly.
okay, so just to be clear, what I'm hearing, and just bear with me because we want clarity for all people. So Bayou Title recognizes that a resident's ready to move. They're making the request to the city or the bank 3 days before. Who's the request going to?
To the city.
To the city, okay. So when the city says, okay, we approve this. When the city says, I received that after that 3-day, that there's that 3-day turnaround, then what's the next step? Just for clarity. After that 3 days,
At that point, the city is going to authorize Liberty Bank to transfer the funds.
okay?
We can't initiate that because.
Okay, so the city then authorizes Liberty Bank to release the funds. What's that turnaround time?
That's part of the 3-day process.
Well, that's what we're waiting
Yeah.
for clarification.
Got it, from
City.
Mr. Norman.
How long? In other words, okay, so it's January 2nd, let's just say, and I'm closing on January 20th. Do I need to request the funds from the city 10 days in advance for them to be able to get it to me before the 20th?
Mhm.
And then the other also piece to the puzzle is that in addition to requesting the funds, we also have to have the city sign off on the sale itself and the settlement statement and so forth. So we need to also know the time frame for allowing for that to happen. That way, when the sellers come to our office for their appointment, we have money in hand, we have documents signed by the city, and it's a matter of the owners signing their portion to sell the property and walk away from the table with their check.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
the ultimate goal.
Ms. Angela, what we really don't want to do is put the residents in a position that they think they're closing today, they're getting today, and they're not.
Correct.
That's why we're trying to get the assurances out the way early on to make sure that when we tell you to show up Thursday at 2, you're getting your money Thursday at 2, because we've already communicated that, coordinated that, and we have the funds in our possession.
Is there a way, before the next Gordon Plaza Task Force meeting, that once that is resolved, Mr. Montano, that we can just have that total timeline with who, what, when, where in between, like on one document? I think it would just help us to to not have to come and keep asking this again, because now all the moving parts are together.
I mean, just speaking off the cuff, I don't think we'd ever speak in absolutes, but I think there's certainly, once we get the information, a framework of a timeline. I'm sure certain circumstances may arise that would be outside of a time frame, but generally speaking, I think the answer is yes,
Mhm.
unless someone at the table is in gross disagreement with me, to be able to provide, once we know when we need to press the buttons, that you all have released
Yes.
funds, and then someone in the administration signs off the title and then the agreement happens. That seems like a linear path for us to identify with a timeline, and I'll look and see if anyone disagrees.
After we get the information from Norman, I'll ask Brent to update a slide with that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. That's very helpful. One of the other things that we named in the last meeting, and Mr. Montano, you weren't here, because Ms. Sheena had been the sample in terms of the property, we understood that there was an opportunity for Ms. Sheena to go through this process so that we could ensure that whatever is happening, and I heard that there had already been 2 people who that they've done some preliminary work on, to know that that's what's transpiring before we have all 60+ people coming forward, that all those kinks get worked out in advance. So, okay, moving on to just the next couple of quick things. Just to make sure that I heard correctly, there's an option for people to receive a cashier's check and or a wire transfer, as long as the wire transfer information has been provided in advance. Do you already know what information you need?
Yes, we require a voided check.
Mhm.
Proves that I have to prove if Mr. and Mrs. Smith own a property, that I'm dispersing those funds to Mr. and Mrs. Smith
Yes.
joint account. So I would need a voided check, which can be brought to the closing. That's not something they need to get, physically bring to me ahead of time. Our concern is that, as my husband was saying, there's so much fraud in our industry
Mhm.
between phishing and spoofing and email fraud and people hacking in the emails, so on and so forth, that we don't take chances on someone just emailing us
Very
their
good.
wiring information.
Very good.
So the form of a check showing the account holders' names, it'll have all the information I need to initiate a wire to their account,
Mhm.
or even a bank statement from the bank. I don't need to see your personal information as far as money. I just need to see the bank name, the account number and the account names.
Thank you for that.
And I can tell you, my wife is very much a stickler on it. And if someone tries to present a brand new bank account and said, wire it to this, and then and all you have is your information, it isn't going to happen.
Are you two the ultimate point people on this entire process for Gordon Plaza? And the reason I'm asking is because, let's say someone goes to a location and you're not present,
Mhm.
or who are they ultimately calling to if something comes up and they're confused?
Well, I will tell you that Kathy and I own Value Title,
Mhm.
and it's our office which is processing all of these transactions. So we'll be communicating the entire way through. If it turns out that we're not there at the closing and you had a problem, each office is staffed with either a notary or an attorney, or sometimes both. And they can try to address the problem. But if not, I mean, even when I'm not there,
They'll
I'm
come.
always there.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
And then this presentation that you did today, could we have that emailed over to the council president to forward to the board? Could we have access to that?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay,
I don't think I've gotten it, but if you can send it to me,
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
you did, but we'll get it.
that would be great. And yeah, absolutely, we'll send it over.
and then if by chance, because you put in time today, I think a lot of our questions have been answered. But if there is the need, and we're hoping that we won't have to have many, many, many more of these meetings, but if we ever needed you to come back, would you be willing?
Me? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Final question, because Mr. Carl Beller's here. Mr. Beller, some months ago, some draft documents, because we had requested to see those in advance. I just want to confirm, while you're both sitting at the same table, are those documents that you referred to earlier the same documents that were sent over? And would there be anything different? Because we know that those are the standard forms, and we just want to know if there's anything different.
The same package that we provided Carl would be the exact same forms that you would sign at the time of closing.
Okay,
There are some forms that are signed by sellers only, some by buyers only, and some by buyers and sellers, but it's every package is going to be the exact same form.
okay.
Right.
Just confirming that those forms that you sent over are the ones that he's referring to. Is that correct?
Right, the documents that I sent over were documents I received from Bayou Title,
Okay.
as Mr. Lolliberty has confirmed.
Thank you. So one more question about that. So with those particular documents, we understand that those are documents in standard form. Clearly, they're going to be adjusted or amended before the people come in. And so how will the residents have an opportunity to see those forms prior to closing? Because that's a lot of documents.
Yeah, that was part of the presentation, saying that we would make all the documents available to all the parties 3 days prior to closing.
That's the part I wanted to
As
confirm. Okay, thank you.
long as we have an email address of the property, we'll be glad to share it with them. And they can, if they have any questions, they can reach out to us in advance of closing.
Okay, I appreciate that. So that wasn't provided to the city, that's provided to the actual resident. Got it.
Every party.
Got it. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. So at this point, there's still a few loose ends that need to be tied up that we spoke about earlier. I'm wondering if we could just do like we normally do, just a real quick recap. And then if we can set the next date for the next Gordon Plaza Task Force meeting, because we're hoping that every single loose end that's been spoken about today, all of those kinds of things are addressable things before the next meeting.
All right, let's go through our checklist, okay?
Yes.
So first, with the appraiser, with Mr. Baker and bringing him on, Ms. Turner has agreed to send in all the questions to Mr. Baker and his attorney by today, and hopefully we'll get those worked out immediately and get him on board. The next set of issues had to do with legislation that Councilmember Morel was going to work on the specifics with the rental assistance and whether there need to be specific modifications. He was going to get with the Office of Community Development and work on the capacity issue and see if that legislation is indeed necessary. And so he's working on that particular update.
Yes, and then if it is, what it would look like in terms of timeline for council meeting.
The timeline for the legislation if it's necessary, yes. We had, what did we have with Mr.
The
Montana?
relocation assistance, if there was anything else pertaining to that. He said he understood, but I want to just
I think
name that.
the only other thing that I remember on the list was a timeline when the city was to release funds so that you all can prepare best for the closing. So how much in advance of the 3 days do you need in order to provide, and that we would update a slide to reflect that?
And send that one pager right on that.
Okay.
What else, Angela? What are we missing?
If you can forward over the PowerPoint presentation that was presented today.
If I already have it in my inbox, you'll get it. Okay, got it. Okay, good. So if it's in my inbox already, you'll get it
You can send it to the board. Okay, thank you.
as soon as this meeting's over.
And then just confirmation that we understand if there are taxes that are owed,
Yeah.
that's one thing, but if there are fees that have accumulated, we would like to know.
The-
Yes, because we heard Mr. Brent be very clear that they need to ensure that all things are attended to prior to people getting their disbursement. And so if they have to have a written payoff in hand, what will the city provide either to them directly or to the residents so that they can carry in that written payoff in hand?
And just to make it 100% clear, these are any type of fees associated with property taxes.
Yes.
So, and the paperwork associated with that on potential waivers, if the waivers are possible. Go ahead.
If I could just try, $2,000. Typically, we see something gravitate to such a large number, and there are a few. There were some demolition liens, so those are things. Once again, I don't want to speak for the city, but those are usually third-party charges where that was money expended. So I don't know that that's waivable either.
Got it.
You know, because
Got it.
I know there are some where there may have been an $8,000 or $10,000 or $12,000 charge
Yeah.
to demolish a property. And there's one that I think we have kind of queued up to close early on that's affected by that.
Yeah,
But that goes back to.
that's added
all-
to the tax bill.
Yep.
And then when the tax office receives the payment in full that's due, they then give that money to the department that it goes to. They disperse it because when they do the demolition, they file a lien. Some of them have code enforcement liens as well that may be added to the tax bill. And those departments are paid once the taxes are paid. And then in turn, those liens get canceled from public record.
Got it.
Thank you for that.
So once again, that goes back to the law department examining what can be waived and what cannot.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
One other thing, real quick, is it was mentioned, and this is potentially a JP Morale, thing here, is as it relates to the renters and their relocation, assistance, that we are very clear about what those renters would have to produce. There was a mention in terms of income. And so we just want to make sure that there are the least amount. We just want to remove every possible barrier to people being able to access healthy homes of choice. So we want to make sure that the renters do not have any problems being able to access their payments for rent.
Sorry, I'm just writing it down. I'll pass that on to him to provide that update. And so if there's no additional issues, we need to go, Angela, to look at the next meeting date.
Yes, please.
And
Um,
we did last time, I just want to make it really clear that
Mhm.
we're going to be providing all of these updates as soon as we get them and sending out emails, just as we did last time.
And very helpful. Thank you for the communication. And I also want to say thank you to CAO Montano about responding when requested. We thank you for that. We have board members that have already indicated that they have some conflicts that first week in January. So can we look toward the week of the 10th to provide people to?
Sadie, you're looking at the council calendar. 9th is unavailable, okay. Okay. The afternoon of the 12th?
That's a Thursday, the 12th. What time?
You tell me what works for you. We have availability. I know you all usually like later in the afternoon.
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock on the.
Just, I have a hard stop at 5, so if we can do maybe like a 3:30.
That's fine.
3:30.
3:30, yes.
3:30 on the 12th, if you can add that to my schedule. Thank you. All right. Hang on.
I just,
We've got two people that want to.
Okay. I just want to name really quickly in the name of the residents of Gordon Plaza. I want to thank the people who are in the room, who are here in solidarity with the residents, because this has been a long and arduous fight. It's been 41 years. These steps forward are important, but we understand that we have to be vigilant until the end. So we're asking people to just maintain a level of commitment to ensure that the residents don't have to incur unnecessary burden mentally, emotionally, or physically. They've already done so. And so these meetings are intentionally and deliberately intended to provide ease for them. And so we just thank everyone for that thus far. Anything else?
I'm going to take, Ms. Hurst, did you want to say something? You're good? You're good? Oh, what? What? All right. No, I'm not. I just thought you wanted to say something. You.
No, I just want to say thanks to everyone who came out today and provided us with the information that we've been looking for over a year. So thanks, and I wish all of you, on behalf of the board and the residents of Garden Plaza, I wish all of you a happy holidays.
Thank you, Ms. Hurst. Appreciate that. Ms. Garner, come on up.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I just wanted to say I still have some concerns about this process. I do believe that the public, as well as the Gordon Plaza residents, should have some transparency in this process, as well as accountability. that there are valid questions that continue to be ignored, that still need to be addressed. I'm even suggesting that it requires an audit. And this is regarding Sheriff Garner, Butler, Jim Thorns. And it kind of creates a problem because, first of all, my understanding, which nobody's, contradicted at this point, is that the contract with Sheriff Garner should have had the approval of the council as a whole in Bonk, which it did not. It was only the mayor and the city attorney's office. And the council did call out this type of behavior by the mayor and, even the city attorney's office regarding the smart city situation, which is still under investigation at this moment. So that's still yet to be determined. But it puts the council in a quandary because the council basically has an inconsistent application or a selective application of how we decide to do this or that. Which I think what's most important here is that we have a process that's accountable, that's transparent, that's consistent, which we still don't have. I still don't have answers to the questions that I've presented to this council. I think that the Sheriff Garner contract is still questionable. And with that, we're talking about the appraiser coming underneath Sheriff Garner as a subcontractor, which is questionable. The proposal of Sheriff Garner read that Sheriff Garner and Mr. Butler's firm would use their best efforts to recruit amounts spent by the city to assist residents, which has to do with saving the city money, which is how we got into this whole problem in the first place. And then it goes on to say, regarding the pending litigation, our team at the direction of the city will also engage in attempts to resolve this matter via alternative dispute resolution and hardball negotiating to save the city the cost of protracted litigation. So I do think that all of this needs to be addressed. I think that there is a requirement for transparency, accountability, and these are valid questions. And since they're valid questions, whatever the answer is to them, the question should not continually be ignored. We're just going to proceed with this, whatever it is that really wasn't right in the first place, or is at least questionable. And also the city attorney's office has conflicts of interest that in my situation of the last 50 years, have shown to both the mayor's office and the city council. And a conflict of interest extends to the fact that they represent both the mayor and the city and the city council, which we've seen recently. The council and the mayor have had some issues. So this entire thing needs to be addressed. It's not just about Sheriff Garner. I mean, it's not just about Gordon Plaza. It's about how this city is operating as a whole, having the internal controls, having the checks and balances that we don't have. And that when somebody voices these concerns, we just move on like they're invisible and said absolutely nothing. And that's not said to cause these people any delay. It's said so that this is done in the correct fashion for them, for the rest of the citizens of the city, for everybody moving forward, because it's unacceptable that the city has operated this way for so long. And then when people bring valid concerns, you guys just ignore it. And the fact that you're still ignoring it, that nobody even wants to even have an intelligent conversation about what is this really? How did this process happen? Is a problem. And I pray to God that the city is released from the evil strongholds of corruption that have held the city for decades now, for centuries now, but at least decades that these people have been afflicted by and decades that my family has been afflicted by. And if you don't change these corrupt, convoluted processes, you'll continue to have the same results.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gardner. We have a meeting set for the beginning of next year. Thank you to all of the presenters. Thank you to all of the folks from Gordon Plaza. Angela, for being so consistent in your engagement in this process. Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.
Bye-bye.